I'm Cal, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Ursula von Rydingsvard, Amanda Gluibizzi, and Jason Rosenfeld. We are also thrilled to have the poet Vi Khi Nao, who will read to close today's program. The Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that we are on the unceded territory of the Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee people. We acknowledge that many indigenous nations with ties to this land, and we recognize that the Lenape still call Mannahatta home. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings unfolding across the country following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAddy, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, and Toyin Salau, and in response to generations of structural violence against Black communities. Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to support ongoing action in the struggle for racial justice. Before I introduce our hosts, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. And now to introduce today's hosts and guests. Ursula von Rydingsvard was born in Germany and has lived and worked in New York City for over 40 years. Over a remarkable 4-decade-long career, Ursula von Rydingsvard has become one of the most influential sculptors working today. She is best known for creating large-scale, often monumental sculpture from cedar beams, which she painstakingly cuts, assembles, and laminates before finally rubbing a graphite patina into the work's textured, faceted surfaces. Her signature abstract shapes refer to things in the real world: vessels, bowls, tools, and other objects, each revealing the mark of the human hand while also summoning natural forms and forces. In recent years, von Rydingsvard has explored other mediums in depth, such as bronze, paper, resin, and continuing to expand upon her unique artistic vocabulary. Amanda Gluibizzi is an Artseen Editor at the Brooklyn Rail. An art historian, she's the co-director of the New Foundation for Art History and the author of Art and Design in the 1960s, New York, forthcoming. Jason Rosenfeld, PhD, is a distinguished chair and professor of art history at Marymount Manhattan College. He was the co-curator of the exhibitions John Everett Millais and the Tate Britain Van Gogh Museum, Pre-Raphaelites, Victorian Avant-Garde at Tate Britain and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and River Crossings, Olana and Cedar Grove, Hudson and Catskill, New York. He is a senior writer and editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. Jason and Amanda, take it away.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great to be with everyone today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Ursula, for giving so generously in advance, I say, of your time today. Amanda and I are thrilled to be able to talk to you. I'm coming to you from the east end of Long Island. Amanda is coming to you from Maine, and Ursula is in the Schwick in Brooklyn, which is, of course, Bushwick, not far from the home of the rail. And we have a terrific presentation that we've put together for today, and we will have time at the end to open it up to questions for the broader audience. So welcome, Ursula.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So let me just share the screen for a minute, and just a little introduction to who we are and the obligatory Instagram addresses, which is the only way that anyone communicates these days, except through the Rail Zoom. And also we wanted to start with a trailer for the recent film, Into Her Own. But before that, let me just thank a few people, not just people who are involved here, Cal from the Rail and Fong, of course, and Nick and Sophie and Malvika and everyone from the Rail who's been doing this for 120 straight weekdays. This is our 120th Zoom. But also people from Gallery Le Long, Grace Hong, and Mary Sabatino, and of course Maya in the studio, in Ursula's studio. We thank you so much for all your help in putting this together today. So the film Into Her Own, which was directed by Daniel Traub and came out last year from Itinerant Pictures. You can get it on Vimeo or Vimeo. I never know how to say that. Amanda, do you know how to say that?
I don't.
Nobody knows. Starts with a V, V-I-M-E-O, and you can rent it on there, and it's really wonderful, an hour. And we're going to show you right now the trailer to the film to give you a little sense of both the idea in the film, but also a little bit into Ursula's background. So Nick is going to share that.
There's something about Ursula's process that makes the work incredibly distinctive.
I always seem to veer toward the things that are very labor intensive.
I'd never seen work quite like it. Totally fascinated by it.
There aren't many women making sculpture on the scale that she's doing.
I start with a 4x4 cedar beam.
It's a very difficult wood to carve. The fact that it doesn't have much of a grain enables me to use it and abuse it in ways that have a huge range of possibilities.
She is using her own experiences to think about how abstract forms can be what the human condition is.
In the refugee camps, everything was made with wood. The floors, the walls, there was a kind of safety the wood gave me.
When we were growing up, we were afraid of our father.
He used to beat us mercilessly. Somehow, that intense hatred enabled me to figure myself out.
Ursula never wavered. Her artwork was her driving force, always.
Making art is not easy, and it requires a deep, deep need to make it.
She would do anything to become this artist.
Ursula is very driven, and she was a single mother. Keeping it all together was a struggle.
We didn't have anything. It was poverty.
I knew that I needed to do my work to live.
20 years ago, she was making smaller pieces. Now she's making things that are much larger.
She keeps evolving.
I always thought once she got a certain level of success, could relax. What was I thinking?
She's coming into her own.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll go back to our screen share. Okay. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of what the film's about. Ursula, maybe tell us a little bit how it came about, the movie.
The film?
Yep.
Do you think that I can read something first?
Sure. This is
Yeah.
your show.
Yeah.
And this is something that some of the beliefs that I have, and in situations where people ask why I make art. Why do I make art? Mostly to survive, to ease my high anxiety, to numb myself with the labor and the focus of building my work. Objects, or the process by which I concretize my ideas, feel so good. Because I invariably, I'm sorry here, let's see, to survive. Because I invariably, especially with my monstrous pieces, run into intensive anxiety moments from which I have to unravel myself. Because there's a pleasure in it. Because there's pain in it. Because I endure a hefty load of self-doubt. Because I have confidence in the possibility of seeing this work through. Because I see life as being full of abominations. Because life is full of marvels close to miracles. Because my deepest admiration goes to those who have made art that interests me. Because I want attention from those who make good art. Because I need to use both my body and my mind. The labor of my body is what keeps me awake and alive, what numbs me and offers a kind of veneer between me and the things in life which are painful to face. Because the visuals, that which I perceive through my eyes, are an extraordinarily important part of my life. Because I don't want to be doing anything else with my life, that the building of my artwork feels like the most consequential thing I could be doing with my time. Because I can run into a world of my making, both physically and mentally. Because I like working with a group of assistants who become another kind of family. Because I like the daily rhythm of going to my studio. Because it's a place to put my pain, my sadness. Because there's a constant hope inside of me that this process will heal me, my family, and the world. Because it helps fight my inertia. Because I like embroidering around my long ago Polish fantasies. Because I can reach into the future with my work. Because I constantly need to try to better understand the immense suffering and pain of my family that I never seem to be able to really understand. And also because I want to get answers to questions for which I know there are no answers. And how this film came about, it took about 5 years, but there were 3 of them, you know, where we sort of didn't know where else to go because we didn't have enough money to finish it. And the film is only 56 minutes, so it's quite short, but I think we ended up editing a tremendous amount. And it is that film, I have to say honestly that I never did any acting in it. It's not a film you act in. And I felt that I was pulling things, you know, out of my body, out of my heart, out of my whatever, you know, musculature I have, that it was the same way that I am when I'm not being photographed. The man that was doing all of the taking of the photos was so constant, and he lived very close to where I work, so he just came anytime he had a moment. So he came many times, and I think that there's, you know, some possibility sometime, probably after I die, of making another film because he filmed so much. So, and there's so much that we saved of it. So, but I enjoyed it enormously because he was so kind. That's Daniel. That's so kind and so understanding and so not obtrusive. So we had a very good relationship for all of those 5 years. And then the philanthropy of I'm sorry, who's the guy that was the mayor of New York City a long time ago? Oh, the preceding mayor of New York City. No, not Giuliani.
Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg.
Oldenburg.
Mike Bloomberg.
Bloomberg. I'm sorry, Bloomberg. So I went to Bloomberg Philanthropies, and they helped an enormous amount with the film. So they had editors, and that's what we needed. So that's how the film ended up, is you know, in good part because of them. That's it.
Jason, do you mind if I jump in?
Go ahead, Amanda.
Ursula, one of the things that you mentioned twice in your opening statement is about being numb. You say it at the beginning that you make your work to numb yourself through labor and your process, and I'm really curious about that. We so often think about the stereotypical artist as being constantly like alive and receptive and active. So could you speak a little bit about this interest in being numb?
I think it's not literally numb, but it is numb to the world outside of my studio.
Okay.
And my studio is like my haven, the place where I feel safe, the place where I can make my decisions, the place where I really like going to. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm on the road to my the place in which I work, and it's I don't want to say that it's better than life out there. It's not like that, but that life here in my studio just feels like this is what I was born to do. This is what I need to do. This is what's good for me. This is what I like doing. And I think the word like is probably not so honest, because there are obviously a lot of moments of anxiety, and because I make these big monstrous pieces, and sometimes they really go off the rail, and I have to figure it out. I have to undo it. I have to, there are in the summer. I burn my pieces every other year. I burn about 2 or 3, 4 pieces, depending on what I can't stand looking at anymore. So yeah. And your first question was numbing. So it's almost opposite to numbing as we think of it. I think it's the numbing of the things that happen outside my studio.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the film, Sarah Z has a great comment about how, art is what saves her life, it feels like, on a daily basis. And just the sheer production of it is a vitalizing force. I certainly feel that from Cecily Brown, who I've been working with recently, that, she needs to be in the studio all the time. And that's really evident from the film, that is your kind of place of joy in a way, even though, as you say, so much of it comes out of your own experience of pain and anguish. But it's in that sense, it's kind of autobiographical without being literal. So much of what you've been doing, just to reiterate, Ursula was born in 1942 in Germany in the middle of the war. Her father was Ukrainian and her mother was Polish. And after the war, they spent years and years in displaced person camps. And in 1950, found their way happily as immigrants to leafy Plainville, Connecticut, near New Britain, where she grew up. And then after education in, just to give people the potted history, University of New Hampshire in 1962, and then University of Miami, traveled around a lot on the East Coast in 1964, and then Cal Berkeley. And then finally did an MFA at Columbia in 1975, at which point she was living down in Soho. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about your MFA experience at Columbia, just briefly, because we get a lot of young artists on the rail and some of whom are still in school. And I always try to ask this question, what was it like for a woman, an immigrant, who was interested in all different kinds of art and maybe didn't exactly know where you were going to end up eventually, working at Columbia in the mid-1970s?
It was my awakening. I taught in junior high schools and high schools art for 9 years, because of my poverty. But coming to New York City, being exposed, because in my that life, the first 9 years of it's like I couldn't, it was impossible for me to really dig myself into the art world, because there was no art world, or I was too poor to even think about that. But as my confidence rose, and I'm just so grateful that that they accepted me at Columbia University. My whole life changed enormously. I mean, not that I wasn't really poverty stricken, but it was so exciting to be there. I would sit on the stone benches at Columbia University and my cheeks would burn because I felt like they knew artists could be artists, and that there was something important about that. And you know, it's like this, and just seeing all of these exhibitions, you know, I thought I landed in heaven.
Even though it was a kind of hardscrabble existence in New York at the time, you talk about that in the film, New York of the 1970s, a broken city, you know, felt a little taste of that in the last few months in a way, depopulated and difficult, but it feels like it's coming back now. But that idea of, there's a great film by Paul Mazursky called An Unmarried Woman. I don't know if you know that movie, with Jill Clayburgh from 1978. And it's about a wealthy Manhattanite from the Upper East Side who moves down to Soho to become an artist. And they were filming it right then. I was thinking about that when I was listening to you on the film, talking about Soho and living there with your young daughter and, you know, trying to find yourself as an artist after grad school. And also I saw that you had got a Fulbright in 1975. Did that give you a chance to travel?
You know, they gave me a Fulbright, but Poland then was so poverty stricken, you know, that they had nothing. They had like no funding, no money. So I ended up not going. And I think that they were going to give me some hallway, you know, as a studio, and of course, no material. So I didn't think it was going to be productive. Yeah. So I stayed in New York City.
And you started doing works in the city, and some works seem to be a little bit related to earth art to a degree.
Yes.
So maybe talk to us a little bit about some of these works and these kinds of installations.
These are cones, and they have a very, very sharp mouth. That is, that it's thin around where their mouth part is, and this is these gentle waves that go around their bodies, and it could be posed in many ways, and I have the one on the beach, but the beach was actually the Battery Park City landscape, city landscape.
The landfill where they excavated they excavated for the World Trade Center towers, and then they just dumped it all on the west side.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't really know what to say about them, but they're kind of wonderful to walk amongst, and they're about waist high, maybe a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a gentleness in it, and I think that there's a very sharp part in it on the top of their bodies.
So many the reviews and interviews with you mention a similarity of your work to Eva Hesse. And this is the one piece that I can really see a similarity here. Were you thinking about New Yorkers, and particularly New York female artists, working, of course, before this point, before 1976? Were you thinking about people like Eva Hesse when you were making these?
I don't think I was thinking about her, though I'm crazy about her. And when I taught at Yale, I did a number of lectures about Eva Hesse. She was, extraordinary. I don't think I was thinking about her here. And I don't think that my work is a lot like her at all.
I agree. Like I said, this is the only piece that I actually really see a visual similarity.
But it's I don't really think about anyone actually when I do my pieces. Any single artist or even though I love to go to museums, and I suppose, I sink in something, but then I think it's not, that I'm not so aware that I thought of her, or I don't think I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You mentioned in your opening statement that one of the things that you make art for is for people whose art you admire. And so it's interesting to think that it's kind of in the back of your mind, although perhaps not something that you can fully articulate.
Yes, it's the same way where people think that I think about the camps that I was in, the DP camps that I was in. While I make my work, I never do. It doesn't work that way, or it's not as simply sort of partnered, even though I'm sure it's my childhood, and I'm sure that it affects my thinking, but it's never clear. And I never I'm not such a believer in words. I'm a believer in something that's in me somewhere else other than the words. And I don't say my words when I work, except like, oh shit, Ursula, why did you do this? Or don't go there, or just words that really don't make clear sense if you're not doing the work. And an important thing that I do is that when I make a piece, I think ahead of time, what it is that I want to make, what it is in the last piece that you couldn't do that you wanted to do. Do you remember? Or, what do you, so I think of something that I want to do, and sometimes it's vague, sometimes it's not so vague. I start working, and because you have to know something about where you're going. I never make a model. I never make a drawing, because that all gets me screwed up. It doesn't help at all. It's all false stuff, because my surfaces are so thought out and so carefully done, and I couldn't do my surfaces unless it was done in the cedar. So so anyway, I'm not even sure where I was going with that.
Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about the cedar, because you have a beautiful relationship with it, basically like a kind of partner, this material, cedar. And I expect this one on the screen now, which was from Art Park in Lewiston, New York, Song of a Saint, St. Eulalia from 1979, is one of the early instances of your use of that wood. We learned just before we went on air that you get the cedar from British Columbia, which is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and we wanted to ask you. But I want to see, why cedar? Cedar was the economic engine of the Phoenician Empire and the symbol of Lebanon still today. Shipbuilding, associations very different from maybe what people think about when they look at your work. So maybe talk a little bit to us about that.
It's a bit of a story that there was a monk that was at Columbia University that bought me the first cedar 4x4s. And when I sunk my circular saw into it, I knew that this was going to be a long ride, because it was so easy. It was almost like butter that you were cutting into. It didn't fight you. And it had a look of flesh. It didn't have all of those, rings that sometimes the fancy lumber has. So, but I hate it. I in a way, I hate it. And every time a truck comes to me and unloads of the 4x4 cedars, it's like, all right, Ursula, this will be the last time, right? And of course, it never is. It never has been. So it's, and I'm allergic to it, you know, because I've smelled it so much. In the early days, nobody had anything, you know, nobody was thinking about covering your having any masks on. So, but it is the material that enables me to express what I want to express. It just is. So here we are.
Is there something about it that accommodates drawing to a degree? This particular wood?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Because I know you
I think
draw
you
on
could
it and then
draw
cut
on
into
any
it.
wood, like a hardwood, like one can draw on it is as long as you have a flat surface to draw on.
But
And
I'm
there's
thinking
no
more
bark
about
on it.
maybe the resulting topographies of the sculpture, because they do have a kind of drawn quality. And then of course you add graphite to it, which we'll talk about. There's the spikiness that you like. Cedar, you know, it's not polished like a hardwood would be.
No.
You know, it doesn't allow that to a degree.
No,
So that kind of
no.
tactility is really critical, it seems.
I think that putting in all of that black stuff that comes in, the black powder that comes in, you know, that's in your pencil, that's very, very finely, it's a powder, it turns into a powder. That makes that wood mine, you know, you don't look at it and think, oh, this is a beautiful piece of wood, you know, look at the, you know, all of the, I don't know, whatever they look at when they look at woods, but it's not that kind of beauty that I'm out for. But I do feel like that blackness makes it more personal to me, for me. I mean, everything you do in art is like very, very selfish. You don't do it for anybody else. Like you don't do it because this person likes it. So that's you know, that's one of the things that I need.
But there's always an implied viewer, right? You never think about it as something which disappears or vanishes. It's always something that's made with the implication that someone's going to look at it. Someone else is going to look at it or touch it.
I don't know.
Huh.
I don't know. I don't think that counts for me, you know, if somebody else looking at it.
Yeah, interesting.
When you're building them up, one of the things that's interesting to me about them is that their scale is so vast. Almost all of them are larger than life size. But of course, they're made from these modules that are they're easier to grasp for the human mind. They're basically like prefab building blocks or something like that.
Yes.
So how do you work on those two levels where you're working on the individual, almost like the digital, and also with this larger scale in mind? Do you go back and forth? Are they in your mind at the same time?
You mean the size?
Yeah.
How do I go from the small to the big?
Well, or how do you work with an individual piece while also building this large scale construction?
I love it. And I wish I didn't. They're not domestic, you know? They're, but I do love it, because when you have something, a piece, when you have, and it's big enough, it almost makes an environment, you know, for the person looking at it, or for me looking at it, you know, and it's more thrilling because you can get more involved with it in some way, because it incorporates your body.
Mm-hmm.
And it incorporates your vision in a way, you know what I mean, where you get fed much more. But that's obviously, that's not true with all art at all. But somehow I have the will to do these huge things. I wish I didn't, but I do. because they're very, very time consuming, very hard to do. But that's nothing. You know what I mean? You can't think like that. You just think like, what do you want? That's the hard one. You have to figure out what you want. And this one that we're looking at right now has the fourth stomach, the skin of the fourth stomach of a cow that I have put around something that's cloth on the inside and peat moss. And there's sort of these two things that are hanging over, you know, throughout the piece. And I think that the playful stuff with the arches in the back are so fun. And the bottom sort of hanging of these bulbs are I don't know what they are. I don't want to explain what they are because I myself don't know what they are, but they each have a nest. They each hide into something in the cedar. They all have their place. And then they perk up above. It's one of my favorite pieces.
And you can see, those of you who aren't that familiar with the work, how each of the discrete elements, like Amanda was talking about, is made from these 4x4, 4-inch by 4-inch pieces of cedar. And then they are covered with the kind of graphite drawn or put on with brushes. How else do you apply the graphite onto these surfaces, Ursula?
Brushes, that's it. You know, I squirt the glue, and then I try to do the brush in a way so that it really, the graphite really sinks in, you know, like really push with the brush.
And then is it varnished afterwards?
No, there is no varnish.
Okay.
That's the end, yeah.
That actually brings up a question that I've been kind of interested in and that I was shooting back and forth with Jason, which is just so many things with wood, of course, are going to come apart, right? And so they're natural materials, even if the glue is the hardest glue that you can possibly imagine. And so I was thinking a lot about, for example, Hawaiian koa bowls, which of course are hand turned, and you can see this one that I've chosen here has these little butterfly or dovetail little sutures in it, right? And so these are of course honest corrections, right? Honest breaks. So how do you anticipate that your work will age?
Well, it can last for a very long time if you have people that take care of the work outside. Inside, it lasts forever, basically. I mean, I don't know whether the word forever is appropriate. But on the outside, all of the museums that have my pieces, my cedar pieces in front of their museum, the pieces do so well. And when I sell the you know, to people that that are just sort of normal people, you know, they stop caring for it, no matter how many letters I give them, and they get instructions, and we try to teach the landscape people that work for them, you know, what they need to do, and basically it's just spraying something on the piece, you know, once a year. But that still doesn't happen, you know, like people get old and they don't know. I mean, it's very hard to you can't police it, you know, you can't police how they're going to take care of that piece. So I am leery now to get the cedar pieces outdoors.
Is that one reason why you've been experimenting with other materials, like the recent copper project at Princeton?
That's correct. Yeah.
But you still talk about, which we will show everybody, but you still talk about the idea that people should touch these works. I mean, I always tell my students, if it's outside, touch it. If it's in the museum, you'll get yelled at. But if it's outside, you should touch it. Nature's touching it, right? And of course, there are acids on your fingers. it will distress it, like, you know, the nose of the cinghiale, the wild boar in Florence, which everyone has touched so that it's sort of gleaming. But you talk about it in a way that that's almost part of the process, because your process in making these things is so about your hands, and it's so about working directly with the material.
But the bronze pieces can be touched. They can be touched. And I also love, you know, like the Buddha's belly and, you know, whatever gets it. And you're right about the acid on the fingers, that it changes it, but it changes it in a way that feels good. And the bronze will last 2,000 years, but the patina does not last, you know, lasts maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years.
Right. Well, I mean, Bartholdi, the gentleman who made the Statue of Liberty knew that that copper was not going to look like it did when they first put it up. I was thinking a lot about that when I was looking at your work at Princeton, just the use of copper. You're taking it into your own hands, in a sense. It's going to change. Amanda, do you want to talk about Tillman?
Yeah, so Ursula, I was so excited that I was invited to have a conversation with you, because I traveled with my family all throughout Germany a couple of summers ago, and we stopped and saw many Tillman Riemenschneider cathedral-sized wood pieces. And as I was looking at them, I was thinking about your work in the back of my mind. And so this is something I think that's kind of an interesting thing. There is a very long tradition of European, Western, Central, and Eastern European large-scale wood sculpture. And so I was curious, do you see yourself as being part of that tradition?
I never thought of it. You know, I never thought of it, but my father was a forest. You wouldn't call him a forester, but I think that he used to cut. I mean, I know that he cut trees when he was very young, when he was like 13, 14, 15, because he was given to a family as his father died, and the family could use him for whatever they wanted. So he did that a lot, and he would continue having an axe in his hand and cutting up wood in order to put in the oven, or in the, you know. So I mean even in the United States, you know, he cut wood all the time, and so that I put his favorite
axe, yeah,
his favorite axe in his coffin. So there's I don't know, there must be something, you know, that's running in my blood. I don't necessarily want it to run in my blood, but it does.
It's interesting that the Riemenschneider works, you know, obviously are all German, you know, religious Christian objects. And we showed briefly a couple of your earlier works, which had relationships to saints. This one, St. Martin's Dream, this wonderful project that was at Battery Park City in the landfill in 1980. And then this work, which is dedicated to St. Eulalia, which made me think of John William Waterhouse's peerless Victorian painting of St. Eulalia from 1888. But the Christian side of the religious side of it has kind of diminished in a literal way in your work. But do you think there retains some kind of a religious resonance? I remember you talking in one interview about how the only nice place in the displaced persons camps was the chapel. And it was a place of kind of holiness and purity, and a respite from the difficulty of life in these camps. Do you think, or would you say that your more recent work has a kind of spiritual quality, even if it's not dedicated to saints?
Well, I think if you see that in it, I'm very happy, you know, but I never think about that. And I was very, very religious right up until junior high school. and just to walk after having a confession with a priest and walk down the stairs of the church, you felt like, oh my God, clean, clear, not heavy, light. But it didn't last. Like in the beginning of high school, it didn't. I you know, because even then I was thinking of being a nun. But I can't. I haven't been able to do this for decades now. To believe. I don't want to say to believe in God. Like I would prefer to say that I believe in evolution. I believe in nature, but not the God that people describe as the God that I think. I don't know. I don't want to go there too much.
Yeah. Okay. It's a little bit related to Jefferson's idea of nature as God instead of the God associated with religion. But in works like Paddywhack, this work from 1997, or Skip to My Lou from 1997, and this one was presumably a commission from Microsoft for their plant. So talk a little bit maybe about how you started to get all these kinds of commissions and how even now you sort of wade through them in terms of works that people want you to do for them.
Well, I don't think I even want to tell you the Microsoft story because it's a horrible story.
Oh, no.
Now I really want to know.
Yeah.
Oh my God. They just don't get art. The first thing that they did is they put some kind of a huge thick plastic on the inside of this ring, in a sense, and then put it, and then put a lot of water into it, so it could be like their pool.
Right.
They could wade in it. It's just, there's just a lot of young kids, I guess, that work at Microsoft that I don't know. I don't want to say anything about it, but this piece did not get care, and this is Microsoft. It did not get care. So they told me 2 days before they were going to destroy it, so I didn't have any time to try to save it. And it's gone.
Yeah. Their loss.
Yes. And it's a huge, it's like 66 feet long, it was just, and everybody enjoyed it so much, and they had weddings there and so on, but it's a real disappointment.
Is this a work like the later Blackened Word from 2008, which is the product of a design that you then extruded into height and dimension?
I never thought of the relationship, but there is a relationship. That's right. And except that the Blackened Word, they're much closer together. It's like an L and a T and a U. They're like much closer together, and that they have a system that's not quite as wild as this for Microsoft.
So this is probably one of the earlier works that people will look at and say, this is what
this is Ursula.
Right? This is what you're doing. You sent us wonderfully, and Maya, the studio, a lot of photographs. And so many of them have, people in them.
Yeah.
Which as an art historian, we love because everything looks the same on a screen, but also because, it is about, as we've been talking about, there is a kind of relationship that you're building in terms of the form and the body. So maybe could you talk a little bit about the evolution of these kinds of bowls with folds in this kind of form?
And I don't know what the deal is with me and bowls. Yeah, I don't really want to make. Well, I don't say, "Oh, I'm going to make a bowl," but somehow that's what happens. But you never know the whys of this. But the interesting thing about this bowl, it's got a beautiful mouthpiece at the top. So if you're at the second floor of the Detroit Arts Institute, you can see the top, you know, but on these, you know, when the photographers come, they don't have a ladder, you know, they are a ladder that high. So, but I really do like this piece, and it exists now at the Detroit Institute of Art, and again, it's a museum, so they do have people that will take care of it, conservators.
It has a really wonderful, almost like geologic feel to it.
Yes.
It's I remember I was always looking at your work and I knew that they were wood, and then the first time I saw one in life, I couldn't believe it wasn't stone, because it did look like it existed for millennia in this really, really wonderful way.
But you can see how the person that made this loves nature. Or not this, almost all of my pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the first work that moves, that was rigged to move. And we don't have a film to show it here, but I saw a film of it at Gallery Le Long. It has this rigging with these pulleys at the top. It's a bit like a carousel horse, and the carousel horse goes up and down. And it also makes me think of more recent work by Jordan Wolfson, who works in LA, and his kind of activated great edifices and you know, constructions that he builds with dolls being flipped around, etc. But maybe talk a little bit about the great leap from these huge static monumental forms into something which is really loud and almost looks like a sewing factory from the 19th century.
Yes, 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 except that they're echoes from wood hitting against wood, because the center parts that you see that go up and down hit the back of what they're going into, hit the back and then hit the bottom and then hit the front and then go up again. And they all do it at different times. You know, they have a rhythm. And to listen to it, to be in it, to hear those echoes, it just felt so good. I think this is probably, you know, one of my 2-3 favorite pieces. It's I love it.
You've never done really repeated this in any sense, you know?
No.
I don't mean repeat, but I mean sort of come back to this kind of form again.
Yeah, I had another huge monstrous piece that would open its mouth. It just had a whole top that would open, and that top would go back and front again and close. And that had a sound as well. And it was huge. And I showed it once at Gallery Le Long. But the sounds, you know, I don't usually go for sounds. The sounds for those 2 pieces were really important to me.
Well, I think that's that industrial element of it. You know, I see your work as so muscular, and I don't mean that in a masculine way, because it's not. It's just very muscular, and the process is so visible, and the scale of it, and the idea of you talking about that you don't use sketches or drawings or maquettes. So the size of it, you have to feel it out as you're working, as you're moving, and
and everybody thought that I had my assistant named Bart in it, and that he had the cover on his back, and he would go forward, you know, and down and again back and forward. But obviously he wasn't there. There was a machine. Yeah.
So here's a work in the Queens County Family Court, Katul Katul, which is very difficult to photograph. I mean, you have done, but just to get a sense of its vastness and its alien quality and the kind of rising, it's like so many of the sculptures which have these kind of sleeves or arms, they feel like they're rising and descending at the same time. And it's a plastic and aluminum, a departure from the normal material.
And the main thing is it has a opening to the sky at the top, you know, because that's, you know, that light then made all of the difference. And that it had a bluish tinge, like you see, and it's a plastic. I've never worked with plastic.
So this was cast from the cedar pieces.
Yes, I needed to do this entire thing in cedar first. That's exactly right.
The same interview that you talk about being in the church, you mention particularly being interested in watching the priest fold the cloths and being so careful and being so respectful of this texture and this really, really pristine material. So we see plastic here, but of course you've also worked with textile and with paper making. So could you tell us too about how does this relate then to the rest of your work? Does you go from this really wonderful, supple yet hard wood to something that is so delicate?
Yes, and with the Dieudonné pieces that I've made, and I've done a lot, that's happens that you make a print only one of a kind. You can't double, you can't, you know, make multiples of that. I use silk. I use the best of silks, always, or maybe sometimes ribbons, or sometimes because they sink into the freshly made paper. But I don't know whether I need to sort of compare it with what's going on here with this piece. I can just say that it was a huge thing to make, and it's really a lot bigger than it looks in these pictures. When we were working on it, that and this is in Jamaica. When we were working on it, I got so many problems with the other people that were working. They were you know, because they had their jobs to do, and they thought I was interfering, and they were jealous because I had the best part of the building, and they thought that you know, being paid $200 to make this was you know, way too much, because they have no clue. And of course I had to put in extra money because it wasn't enough, because I always want to make the best and biggest, you know, from whatever I get at you know. So anyway, but what the beautiful thing that happened is that when you looked through this this oval form, look up at the opening at the top of the building that looks at the sun, and it's just beautiful. It's just so delicate, and it just feels so light. So, and they're taking care of it. They're taking good care of it, and I'm so grateful.
I should say too that for our participants, if you watch the film, there are wonderful shots and footage of Ursula making some of her papers at Dieudonné, so you can see how the scale of them and all of the different materials that she's bringing to bear in making these.
I bring suitcases full, like I bring 4 suitcases full of that material.
Ursula, did you work with Mfa and Cobb Fried when you installed this or conceived of this?
Harry Cobb, I
Okay.
adore him. I mean, he's dead, but we had a great relationship.
Yeah, because I mean the architecture is obviously amenable to sculpture, but this is a unique sculpture. So that's a great partnership as it worked out. Do you want to tell people what the title means?
In Polish, it's katul szubstopieca. It's making a a I don't know, it's basically flour and water, you know, mixed, and you put it in your hands, and you probably put a little bit of flour around it, and you you throw it into the boiling water.
Huh.
And we used to play with our heads, you know, katu, I mean, it's, yeah.
So it has a kind of family connotation, like kids play.
Yes,
kind of connotation.
yes.
So here is Mama, Build Me a Fence from 2001, 2002. On the left, and the customary shot to give you scale on the right. And then we stuck in here this photograph, famous photograph of Barney Newman. I always call him Barney, even though I obviously never knew him. Barney Newman and a woman standing in front of his grand painting Cathedra from 1951. Maybe see your reaction to this kind of idea from abstract expressionism of scale and the body and the verticality of the forms, the planks there on the left of cedar, and how you sort of think about this kind of work, which is, I think, very much related, it seems to me, to the more recent wall-hung work that you've been doing.
I think the Barney Newman piece is great, you know, and I'm glad that they put people in front of it, you know, because you could do, I mean, but it's a little hard for me to, you know, to talk about it because I'm not really looking at it.
Mm.
You know, I'm seeing a midget, you know, stamp thing of it. What do you think?
Well, I think,
because you put it here for a reason, and because you're so smart.
Well, oh, thank you. That's far too much for me. But you know, I think the idea of the sublime is something which I read very strongly in your work. You disavow the idea of a kind of reading these as beautiful, as you say in the film, because beauty is something which is very temporal and something which is associated with particular moments and periods and peoples and cultures, and it's shifty. But the sublime is something else. I think the sublime is something that's more universal, and Newman was onto that, and the abstract expressionists were onto that, and Rothko and Krasner, and Barnett. Newman wanted the pictures to envelop you with their color, and then of course the zips, those lines that refer to the body to a degree. Your works, I don't think they're so enveloping because they're often quite closed just because of the use of a cylindrical or round form. You have to move around it to see the whole thing. And the wall works sometimes come towards you almost menacingly, like a J. DeFeo, which I love, but at the same time, they don't really make you want to sort of be pulled in. And yet it's what I like to tell my students, aerobic art, meaning it pays off for you to go right up to it and put your nose to it and look at it and then move back and see it in scale. And that sublime experience of the works which are gigunda, large and awe-inspiring, is something which you're riveting in terms of how one experiences your work. You are smart. We you know, people like Amanda and I go through decades of training, really. We have to come up with something to say, I would say. But thank you very much. This is something too, I always tell my students too, that once you have this, and of course you have it too, right? And I assume most of our participants do, you can't turn it off, right? So constantly then, as you're looking at things, you're making connections, which is why when Jason looks at these images, he starts thinking about Barnett Newman and scale. And when I'm looking at Tilman Riemenschneider and Kreglingen, I'm thinking about Ursula in the back of my mind, even though of course Tilman Riemenschneider couldn't possibly have imagined what your work would look like. And so it's just one of those things. It's fun to live in our heads. I love it. It's a kind of associative curse, I think, you know. we look at things and we make connections, but it's never the implication that this influenced you sort of directly. That's not what it's about. It's about trying to find a kind of commonality of creative expression that you know, artists are working with over time. I think too, Jason, when you built this slide, I was really struck by it too, because when you see Cathedra in life, you realize that, of course, blue is a fugitive color, right? Even the blue that Newman is using. And of course, this piece has a long
intense history of being attacked and things like that. But the blue in Cathedra is not just a plain blue, right? It's not just a blank field. It actually has depths. And so, you know, when Newman talks about being enveloped by it, you actually kind of do feel like you could stand on the precipice and just tip yourself into it like a pool or something.
That's right.
So looking at your work then, Ursula, I'm seeing, of course, all the modulation and the color, the grain, the way that you're using the wood. And so here too, it's not just this totally visually flat surface. Rather, it's something that's almost like it's pulsing or breathing.
And when you're saying pulsing or breathing, it's very important, and it's sometimes hard to see, that the 4x4s are placed it's not a flat, it's not totally flat, you know, they're placed like an inch and half an inch, you know, in front or in back of one another. But there's none of them that are right perfectly in the same place.
These kinds of work, I think you see the way that the project is expanding, both in terms of the relationship to the wall, or the expansion from the wall, or the leaning against the wall, and these wonderful gaps there at the bottom along the wainscoting, so that you don't, you know, it's not fixed necessarily. It has that kind of tension of weight and support and balance. And then also the way that I think it's as if you're attacking the surface here in Lace Medallion on the left, and the use of chalk, introducing a new color, so not just black. I think of you as the Johnny Cash of art, because you're always wearing black, and black is sort of your number one tone. But what did the chalk allow you to do in these works in the early 2000s?
I don't know. I just think that it needed the chalk. It needed some reforming of what the structures were doing. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know the reasons why I do what I do. It's just, it's all visual. And see, you notice that even the straight lines that I take from left to right, from right to left, they're in different places, and maybe this helps make it more active, or it gives it more depth. I don't know.
And certainly there's a kind of visual relationship to minimalism here, at the same time that it pushes way against that. You know, the grid, the regularity, and the expectations of it, and then, you know, denying it at the same time. Yeah. So critical.
But don't you think it's a hoot that I made this Beravici Pici Pa against the wall in a building that is so minimal and so you know, about something that this is not. It's almost like an opposite, you know, to what this building is.
Yeah, where is this installation? Where
this is the Bloomberg building.
Oh, I see. I don't have it. Ah, right.
Yes.
On Lexington.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't even get in there though, can you? I don't think you can go in.
You can get into the lobby. You can get into the lobby, but that's all. You can't get in, and you can't get to the second floor at all.
Right. Yeah, it's great work.
Okay, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, Amanda, do you want to ask about the great tornado-like forms?
Yeah, in your rail interview that you did in 2010, 2011, you say that you always start with a ring at the base. And so it's pretty clear that we're looking at this here, right? But first of all,
I try not to, but I do.
But I'm really curious about that though. I guess it's kind of like, you know, an artist always starting to draw a face by, you know, starting with the eyes or something like that. So tell us about that. I'm assuming it was not a conscious decision, but now it almost seems like it must be just like I don't want to say habit in a bad way, but just something that feels correct to you with your work.
Well, you know, I'm so bad at telling you the whys, the why I start with a, you know, a circle. It's not really a circle. Because it's more like a map of some kind of an island that could be, you know, pretty you know, not so simple. That could be pretty you know, complex. But I don't know what to say about this piece, except that I love the fact that you could, you know, that it's big enough, again, you know, to really embrace you. I mean, I really don't know what to say about this piece.
And you, can you tell our participants, you can get into this piece, right? If you were somehow catapulted in or,
you can,
or
you
dropped
can.
gently.
That's right. That's right.
And so what is it like on the inside?
I sort of think about the inside as being as important as the outside, but the inside is not as full of these little you know, these little protrusions, right?
They're like ball flowers at the top of spikes on Gothic cathedrals.
Yes.
But they certainly follow the sways and the, you know, like this upper left-hand side, you know, comes like, you know, comes a little bit thinner. So anyway, it's, and she's so happy at SF MoMA.
I love how you personalize these works. You always,
I was just
like people always did with ships or planes, and it's always a female pronoun, right? She. But and the way that you talk about it, that they embrace you, because, you know, to imagine embracing this thing is a rocky affair, I think, to put your arms around it. But you clearly are trying to express a kind of tenderness here in these forms. Here's another one on the image here on the right is from the installation of 4 works at Madison Square Park.
That's right.
Ursula did.
That's right.
Under the Madison Square Park Arts and Brooke Kamen Rappaport, a great organization. And here is Damski Sepik, I can't pronounce it, from 2006, which was also at the park. And was a fantastic thing because you could actually enter kind of into it. And it's very translucent. With all these
11 weddings took part inside of it.
Amazing. Art becomes a kind of locus for weddings. Andy Goldsworthy's great line in the Presidio, tree line in the Presidio in San Francisco, that is where every couple seems to go to get their wedding photo taken. Something about Le Long artists and celebrating the most quote unquote important day of your life. It happens there. But this use of resin is a real departure because it has a kind of lightness, and yet it also, you know, looks a little dirty, looks a little weathered, like stone would be over time.
Yeah, it actually doesn't look dirty. I think it's just the photograph that makes it look that way. But the sun determines a lot about how it looks. But this material is made to be seen with the sun. The light and what it does is really the most important thing. So maybe we can take a look at the other one. That looks completely different. And then what I love are these things that look like the scales of fish, you know, and I worked hard to make them in this detail that you have, the white parts, that almost look like frost. It's all over, but you can't see it in the photograph of the entire piece.
I think this surface looks very painterly to me. It looks like J.M.W. Turner's work, palette knife work, and these kind of scrapes and folds and crests that you get on the surface. Even though you're working still from the cedar, casting it from the cedar. So there's a lot of manipulation that goes on once it comes out of the mold.
No, there is no manipulation. You can't manipulate anything once it comes out of the mold. Okay. And just these photographs and that material, they just don't work. I mean, the closest one we have to reality is the one that is the detail.
This one here on the side. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
It almost looks like an ice flow or something.
Yeah, and it looks harsh, and it's not. It's not. It's a whole different thing. I mean, it's interesting that happens. Yes, so this is I just finished making it, and I had to make it on the floor, obviously, because it's very difficult to work on the wall with weights. So, and it wasn't quite finished. And this is just to give you the sense of the scale. And that one is the crystal bridges in the museum, crystal bridges.
Right. And is it installed as it is there on the right on the wall? Could that change if they put it up in the future, or will it always be in that actual orientation, that specific orientation? Yeah,
it can change because the corner I deliberately made that this could be inside, you know, that the flatness enabled one to make it, you know, against the wall and against the roof. You know, if it's a flat, if it's a roof that goes perpendicular.
Yeah.
Or it could float like this. You know, it just depends on what kind of a wall there is. But I love sort of this led me to other pieces that I love, like Egyptian, that you'll see soon.
Yeah, we'll get to. Here is Black and Word, which we were talking about earlier. And this is the kind of canonical normal heighted view at around 5 feet, looking at it head on with these extraordinary forms that are pulsing in and out. Almost looks like cliffs on the side of a landscape. But then when you see the design on the left, bottom left, you can see that it has its organization of its forms is based on, like you were saying earlier, lettering.
Yes, and it's kind of my mother's writing. She couldn't read or write, and when she tried, you know, we could make something of it, but not much. So I just she had a name for me, Ursula, and it has a kind of you know, loving ending. So this is what you are seeing on the above left. You know, what you're seeing from one side, and this is what you're seeing from the top down, is what happened when we took away the wood and we threw the nails, you know, wherever they fell. So this is what it looked like then.
The outline of it,
as
if you could see it from above.
Sulka.
Right, right. The aerial view.
Yes, exactly.
So this was at Yorkshire Sculpture Park.
Yes.
In the exhibition. Where does it live now? Is it there?
The museum bought it. What's the one that's very north of New York? The museum.
Oh, in Storm King or in?
No. Very north. I'm sorry.
Albright Knox in Buffalo.
Yes.
So it's up. So everyone's got to go to Buffalo to visit it. But I love the
Yes.
fact that it was in Yorkshire, at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, because it reminded me of this, one of the great paintings on the planet, which is James Ward's gigantic 11 by 14
Oh my
foot painting
God.
at Tate, London, of Gordell Scar, which is in Yorkshire. And these extraordinary massive cliffs with these local heritage bulls and cows there at the bottom, but one of the great, most dramatic landscape formations in Britain, and something that became, you know, a site of romantic depictions in the early.
It's romantic, but it also looks like the end of the world.
Well, it's
Wow.
apocalyptic. You know,
Amazing.
artists were doing
Yeah.
that. Of course, they were still dealing with a guy named Napoleon. So a lot of this was a sort of reflection of reactions to empire. So this is the painting that that Black and Word made me think of. Here's what Amanda thought of when she saw it.
Oh.
Picture by Cezanne, or paintings of the.
This is his new book from John Elderfield, right?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, yes, about these.
Yes, if he did it at Princeton.
Yeah.
Say that again? Yes. Yeah.
Right, yeah, they had a show, right, of
It's a great book, and it's a great show. And John is hugely wonderful.
And a supporter of the rail, of course. Amanda, do you want to say anything about Cezanne? Because I don't talk about French modernists in these talks.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation about how your work is geologic to me. And again, I'm in Maine, and so a lot of the granite here actually is like falling off of cliffs in chunks, right? It's not just sliding off. It's actually like detaching itself from the planet in these really wonderful cubes. And as I was looking at them in Acadia, I was realizing, like, I'm thinking of Cezanne, and I'm also thinking of pieces like this. What I think is really remarkable about your work, though, is, again, that a 4x4 is something, obviously you would have a difficult time just grabbing it by your hand and carrying it, but you can put your hand around it. And so it has this really wonderful tactile or haptic quality to it.
Yes.
So Droga, this extraordinary piece, there was a great quote in the film, "I don't imitate the cloud, I just look at it." And that idea of a relationship to nature, or things that are imagined from nature, I think that is part of this, in a sense, these idea of, I don't know, this always reminds me of the sort of great sort of monstrous forms. And I was a big reader of comic books when I was a kid, and Jack Kirby comic books about monsters. And it was all about anxiety during the nuclear age, and invasion anxiety, and these sort of extraordinary creations. So this seems so different from everything we've been looking at up to this point. How does Droga come about?
I had a piece that was a little bowl, but that was very complicated on the middle of it, the middle inner part of it. And that's what began the head. It was almost, you know, but I didn't want it to look at anything like a crown or anything like that. But when you look at these closely, I'm so sorry that people can't come close to these details because they're so important. You know, there are like thousands and thousands of little pieces of cedar, you know, that make the beginnings of that head. And then it sort of, you know, crawls, and it crawls on its stomach. And I hate to be so literal, but the stomach, it's important to see how it meets the floor, and what does the floor do pushing up on this stomach. And then there are so many different kinds of patterns that I put. And this is one of the first times when I left the whiteness alone on the wood, on all of those patches that you see. And it just feels like, you know, it's this thing that's kind of, you know, like crawling on, you know, and very slowly with a lot of weight. And then the top, of course, is the other side, and the other side just spills out. And I'm sorry that this was taken so low, because when you look at it from the top, the spill is even bigger. So the innards kind of just come out of it. And this is a very, the pattern, there is no pattern, you know, it's just what I do. And each, you know, each fraction of an inch is different from every other thing that gets done. But this was one of the most difficult pieces for me to make, and I love to make it. But the good news is that she is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art now, you know, forever, or, you know, they bought it, yeah.
Great. Yeah, we're going to show you the other piece from Philadelphia in a minute. And I want to move a little quicker.
Can I
yes.
pop in and just ask a question?
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts of the film, Ursula, is when we see your fingers moving over the cedar.
Yes.
And I'm just curious about that. What do you feel?
Oh, I have to know the relationship between the neighboring 4x4. What did I just do? And I can tell by looking at it, and I can tell by feeling it. And then I know better what I need to do to draw on top of the top part of the 4x4, so that it can go to the cutters and be cut.
Interesting.
So just going to go through a few more works so we can get to questions, because we have people who are really eager to speak to you. I work here at the great North Carolina Museum of Art, which is where I had my first internship as a college student in the art world. Terrific piece. And here, just some views of you kind of starting to lay it out and organize it as a form, and then building it up in the studio from that circular beginning, and then expanding out up from there. And then these marvelous pieces at Storm King, which everyone should go and visit. It's reopened. Storm King Sculpture Park in Mountainville, upstate New York, where you can see Ursula's work in abundance, and works like Luba with this great arm sort of reaching out and then connecting to the ground, these sort of tendrils blackened with graphite. And then this one, which I was not familiar with, Hemorrhaging Cedar 1 and 2 from 2012, cast abaca paper, which was installed at Yorkshire Sculpture Park. These two beautifully textured works. What is abaca paper?
Abaca paper, yes. It's very strong paper. Huh. And I actually laid it when it was wet, when the paper was wet, over the piece of cedar that I cut up and had these little nodules. Huh. And it drinks the color of the cedar.
Yeah, it's like a kind of repoussé technique. So you're pushing it out from the back, and it made me think of another work of British art, which is this Charles Rydinsgvard's great Rose and Teardrop. Not as influence, but just the idea of this sense of the decorative and repetition of intricately designed forms derived from nature and then abstracted from nature. And I just, that compositional quality in these papers is very graphic and very moving, I think, in these designs. And the photograph there on the right of the this figure who's showing you the scale of it and the way they sort of look up at it, it's, you know, it is welcoming, like Michael Heiser is not, you know, these kinds of pieces, they really are sort of bringing you into their space. Ocean Voices, which is similar to Droga in a way, this great, huge, massive form. And then this one, which you can go see at the home of the Nets, the Barclays Center. Oh, how do you say the title?
Ona. It means she.
She.
In Polish.
All right. So inserting this figure into this space of masculine, athletic endeavor here in Brooklyn, the Barclays Center, designed by shop architects who are good friends of mine, actually. And I loved it when I first saw this. It was the perfect addition to this oculus there at the entrance. And that's a piece, bronze, which people love to touch. And that's where they meet. That's where people will meet if you have tickets. So I'll meet you at the sculpture. Of course, they may not know who it's by. It's like the bat, the huge bat that there used to be at Yankee Stadium where we used to meet before the games. But I think that's a wonderful addition to the townscape of Brooklyn. Here are two works, other large works from 2013-14. I'm just moving ahead so that we can get to some questions. These very delicate works, Untitled Stacked Blankets from 2014, where again, you're playing around with cow intestines and string in this one. And then this is the piece at Princeton University made out of hand-pounded copper. I wrote it down somewhere, 5,722 hand-pounded copper plates. Maybe just talk for a minute about, a couple minutes about this work because it features so much in the film.
Copper just gives so much. Like, look at the white, green tears, like the sort of washed down, and it was just the colors it can give you it's just so fantastic. And of course, once you do this, you only do this once. Then, and she looks gorgeous, and she sort of looks onto the huge, huge window that's, I don't know, 30 feet by 20 feet, and sort of looks at herself, and when the sun sets. But she turns what she has to turn into, and I'm just hoping that it's not going to be all brown, but it's not, because the green is going to be showing it. This is white green, which is marvelous. So we'll see, but it's not sort of as joyfully surfaced as it is when we see it at the beginning.
Great book with no words. Cedar and linen. It's heavy, right? Really heavy.
Well, this linen is almost like a landscape. You know, that it's that the two boards are sandwiching.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this is the other work in Philadelphia, bronze bowl with lace and the use of coloration. How does the color operate in this design?
We stuff the inside, you know, with a string of lights.
And it just emanates through the material?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow.
And during the day, it doesn't do much, except it responds to the sun very beautifully. But at night, it's even more beautiful.
And you have this great prime spot right at the edge of Fairmount Park in the rear side of the museum.
It's Philadelphia Museum, right?
Yeah, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Yeah.
This is absolutely amazing looking, striking work and responding to the building around it at Stanford. Machna?
I'm sorry?
I think I have a detail of it here. This sort of filigree upper section here, which kind of almost becomes diaphanous into the sky. And does this also have lights in it?
Yes, definitely.
And one more detail there.
I think 400 lights it's got inside.
Wow. And here's another detail. So, you know, again, these are made out of, this is bronze, but it's done using the cedar as the design and then cast from that. And with the addition of light.
With the sculptures that have lights in them, do you specify to the owners that you would prefer them not to be able to be seen from above? Do you want that apparatus and that mechanism to be visible?
No, this has it's not open at the top.
Oh, okay.
It's closed, so there's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's lit from within and also from below in these spots that come up.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, so finally, a couple of these amazing, we'll end with this and then we'll move to questions. With these larger and larger wall works, the one on the left for Paul II from the last couple of years, that is presumably for your late husband. And then the piece on the right, which is a very different kind of form than we've seen in your work leading up to this. So how have you been responding in the present to, you know, our kind of lockdown situation and dealing with being kind of stuck in the studio to a degree? Are you able to fulfill commissions, travel at all?
I'm not traveling, but I am working, and I've been working for the last 2 months, and my entire team came back. So, and some of them, you know, have been working for me for like 24 years. So, but the pandemic, you know, had a real toll on all of us. You know, somehow we came back different, somewhat different people. And it's taking us, you know, time to sort of adjust again to what we were, which is a family. But I think we're doing it.
Yeah, it's clear that that's very special to you, working with these people
Yes.
who are part of your team, having meals with them. I've been working for a while now with Andy Goldsworthy. He feels sort of the same way about his team of dry stone wallers that he brings with him to all his projects. You know, it's very clear that you are the artist. They're very talented craftspeople, but without them, you can't execute these things.
Exactly.
As you would want to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a lovely part of the film. Well, for myself, thank you so much for this conversation today. I'll let Amanda wrap us up, and then we'll go to Cal and questions, and then the poetry.
Well, I always like to end by just asking you, Ursula, is there anything that you want to tell us or ask us?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed the both of you. And I think, you know, given the times and given, I just so admire how hard the two of you are working to sort of make your time worthwhile, and to make it worthwhile, not just to you, but to many, many people. So I'm grateful to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really kind.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Jason, for guiding what was such a luminous and wonderful conversation. And now we'll move on to the questions from the audience. I'd like to go first to Ken Nuremberg. I'd ask you to read an abridged version of your question earlier. I will unmute you.
Is a very long-winded question, so I'll try to keep it simple. I actually want to share a little anecdote, though, because your work was one of the first really large-scale, massive pieces of sculpture that I saw inside of a gallery. This was way back when I was an undergrad at the Heron School of Art, and they just opened this new gallery that had, 25-foot ceilings or so. And the piece was one that looked almost like an enormous staircase, and it reached pretty close to the ceiling in that space. And it was, that encounter was, it was really pretty profound, and it stuck with me because I was dealing with this sculpture that felt like a sculpture and as well as a piece of architecture at the same time. And I've noticed that there's this switch between your work when I see it inside versus when I see it outside, in a park or something like that. It becomes, the work can shift between being a piece of interior architecture where it becomes part of the pathways and the flow of the architectural space, kind of restricting your movement around it. Whereas outside, you have this whole different relationship with it because you can get as far away from it as you like. You can walk as far away from it as you like and approach it the way you like. And it actually becomes something that's actually like the looking at a building from the outside, especially since they have these interiors, although they don't have doorways. So I'm wondering if you think in those terms at all, when you're making work that you know is going to be shown inside a gallery space versus outdoors. And I hope that makes some sense.
Are you referring to a particular piece that I made, like that's like a staircase? Because
yeah.
SF MoMA has that now. They're big. They're big staircase, but it's never been outdoors.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking generally in terms of like not necessarily.
I see. Right. Yeah, I wouldn't put that one outdoors, but SF MoMA is doing beautiful things with it. I mean, I think they're going to be showing it next year.
Oh, good.
And it's huge.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think I was a sophomore in undergrad at the Heron School of Art at the time, and it was just walking into it and seeing it. It was just kind of was really revelatory for me when I was 19 years old or something like that.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know if that question makes sense to you in terms of that kind of shifting between outside work and inside work.
From the beginning, I have to know whether this is going to go inside or outside, because many of my pieces cannot go outside.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you for your question, Ken. We'll move on to a question from Deanna Lee. I will ask to unmute you now. You can ask your question.
Okay, hi Cal, thank you very much. Thank you, Ursula, so much for being incredibly generous with not only this talk, but your whole body of work. It's so inspirational. I've been a longtime fan, so thank you. And my question is,
You're so welcome.
And I wanted to ask you, I'm interested in the way that you're applying the graphite. To me, it seems there's a certain possible similarity and the sort of attention to touch that I perceive in the work of Anne Truitt. And I know her work is radically different in style, but she also made sculpture, but with this kind of loving, almost caressing, massaging application of paint to her surfaces. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I wonder if you feel any resonance with that, or if this is a characteristic that maybe appears in the work of sculpture, sculptures made by women.
I don't even know anybody else that puts graphite on their work. I mean, they're probably, but especially on wood. And it probably doesn't make sense to anybody else. And but I feel like that way I can make places that I want, that I want to pay more attention to, or some of them more important parts, or that this is a way that I can force it to be, to have more clarity about what it is. And again, the most important thing for me is that I feel that it makes this wood, which is basically whitish, or it's brownish, but that it makes it more mine. I can own it. In other words, my eyes like that better.
Wow. Yeah, there's such a sense. I feel like it's bringing out some personality in the wood in some way, or maybe it's like sort of you're communicating more deeply with it in terms of the making its tactility really apparent.
Yes, yes, that's very true.
Thank you for your question, Diana. Next, we will go to JC. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Ursula. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Jason.
Hi, JC.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really lovely to hear you talk about your work. And my question was, I noticed that your kind of signature forms appear around 1989. And it's around that time that references to traditional objects and customs become a little less obvious in your work, like the kind of like the ladles and the kind of the wood stacking sort of becomes a little bit submerged. And obviously Poland had a really hard time, all of Central Europe, under communism. And that year was a big turning point politically for the region. And so I guess I'm just curious if you felt like that was a big emotional shift in your practice, or if it was more of just like a natural kind of discovery of a form that you ended up following for a long time.
So just exactly what time are you talking about?
I guess I'm thinking about, I think Jason showed the piece earlier, like 1988, 1989, there's...
Which piece?
Let me see, I'm gonna look for it right now. I have your website up.
Okay.
Let's see, maybe Lace Mountains? I might be thinking of Lace Mountains.
And what about them?
Well, I guess that's where the technique, it seems to me that the technique of using like the shaped blocks kind of carved to create like a kind of a composite shape that is its own form seems to kind of arise.
Yes, yes. I think it does arise in that, but I think it was happening also in the past, you know. I think I've been doing that for a long time. You know, basically like putting 4x4s on top of one another, but obviously I make determinations of the form of the one before at the bottom, and then figure out what the one that's on top of it or the one that's next to it. I think I've been doing that for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Also, my mom's dad is from the Tatra Mountains, and so I was excited to see the
They're beautiful. Yes.
Gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you, JC. Next, we'll go over to Addison. I will ask to unmute you.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Ursula, so much for your talk and for those moderating for the questions. I had the enormous pleasure of seeing your show at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia and was really taken with everything in there, but enormously taken with the leather jacket. And I have a good friend who was working at the time at the museum, and she told me sort of offhand a story relayed from you, I think, about your imagining of this coat and sort of where the coat came from. Yeah, I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about that piece and just these instances where other materials besides the cedar enter into your work, or I guess like become, I don't know, take center stage.
It was kind of a nightmare to do. It was a lot of work, and I'm not sure how happy I am with the result. But it's still something that I'm not quite understanding it. I mean, it just seemed, I mean, we also had fun making it, but I still didn't like what it ended up to be, and we worked really hard on trying to make this thing, this jacket, erect and I don't know how many hundreds of pounds it ended up weighing. And, you know, trying to flap the front, I mean, just to control all of that leather and stuffing, what we stuffed inside of that leather. I mean, it was all sort of, you know, we learned a lot, but again, I'm not so sure about its results, but I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, well, I loved it.
And that Philadelphia Museum of not the Philadelphia Museum, the one that you went to
The
see
Fabric Workshop in Museum.
The Fabric Workshop is fantastic, you know, and I thought my show went really, really well.
Yeah, it really did. It was my first time seeing your work in person. Also, of course, seeing the works at the Philadelphia Museum of Art outside. I visit the bronze bowl with lace out there behind by the river very, very often with my dog. But yeah, I had seen a video of your work, I think probably was when I was in high school, a sort of artist feature that the teacher put on. And I remember realizing for the first time, art can be this. And it just blew me out of the water. So such a gift to see it in person. Thank you.
I'm so happy that you were spurted out of the water.
Thank you, Addison. Got one final question that I'm going to read from S.A. Agian Mata in the chat. Nature is one immediate and obvious reference in these works, not only because of the source material, but also the textures and forms, which reminds us often of earth, geology, as it was mentioned, plants, guts, cysts, motions even, palpitations. The light in particular seems to bring out a sense of motion to the textures, which I find to be a great advantage for your outdoor pieces. Have you installed indoor pieces that could be aided by light in creating this sense of time and movement that natural light causes outdoors? Is this a concern for you at all?
Well, all of this she said about nature, and I'm not sure that I understood it so well, but she's my teacher. You know, nature is what I want to be surrounded by. And of course, I live in New York City, so I don't get much nature. However, I try in my own ways. But nature has all of those things. It has brilliance, like the I don't know, even you can even look at a leaf and sort of figure out so many things, you know, or just sort of borrow so many things. I just think that there's infinite, you know, infinite information that you get in, and it's, I don't even want to call it information, because you're just sort of scouring, you know, the world and just sort of taking in what you want, taking in the stuff that you think is good for you to take in. And then she had something that was at the end.
Yes, the question was about the use of light in your outdoor sculptures. And,
yes, I've never used using light on indoor sculptures. Yes. I haven't done that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ursula. This is really, truly wonderful, and honestly, it's illuminating about your work, and we're very grateful for your time.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your you know, the way you speak and and how kind you are. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with a poem, and so today we've carried that onto these community events, and we're thrilled to welcome the poet Vi Khi Nao to the stage. And we're also we're grateful for Vi Khi to have been so patient. Vi Khi Nao is the author of 4 poetry collections, short stories collection titled A Brief Alphabet of Torture, and a novel, Fish in Exile. Her work includes poetry, fiction, film, and cross-genre collaboration. She was the Fall 2019 Fellow at the Black Mountain Institute. So with that, I will ask to unmute you.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to indulge in your beautiful work, Ursula. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to your poem.
Thank you everyone for being here. And I'll just read. Within 10 seconds, Death gets up late in the afternoon to wear a dress that spring has discarded inside a mirror. A willow tree rocks her soul to sleep. Winter sits on a melting iceberg, washing his clothes. His white blouse has buttons made from the eyes of 4 pre-extinct polar bears. Summer arrives wearing a sleeveless shirt. While unbuttoning its goal, a leaf takes out a deep fall breath and has a terrible stomachache. Sometimes the wife is compelled to slap her husband inside the SUV. Trong vòng 10 giây, a city burns itself by falling asleep. When it wakes up, it faces a high population of therapists. Meanwhile, Lucifer takes out a knife to scare a Lamborghini, which is a fancy way of saying that a river has fallen asleep at the wheel. And as a result, 2 canoes crash into each other and die on the freeway of Sông Thu Bồn. If you had to throw your head back to see what the dress looked like, it will tell you, gần mực thì đen, gần đèn thì rạng. The second poem I'm going to read is called Jacket. It's very short. My heart is a jacket sipping tea. My letter is saucy. My lining a mammal. Revered Queen, if you insist on putting me on you, please stretch my taut vulva first by bending my knees. And the last poem I'm going to read is called Proverbs of Violence. It's for my friend Giovanni, who is fighting cancer. I believe she only has 14% chance of living, so my heart is a little broken by the recent devastating news. Proverbs of Violence. Fugue of loneliness has visible properties for a post-war mother, mending a porcelain bowl of rice with glue from her underfed saliva. The probability of her swaying to the amnesia of fullness is small and duty-bound by the aftermath of bomb shelters. Our moths stand in front of the graveyard of light with swords of wings, clinging to amplifiers. Sound is a virgin homegrown by the terrorists of opportunities, an incendiary device to depict hatred for the unknown. Not desperation, as long as there is still war, children will enlist out of misguided proverbs of violence. Mưu sự tại nhân, thành sự tại thiên. Bombs should not leave the intestines near a gluttony, should not seek backpacks as places of sacred shelter, waiting for divine signals of detonation. In the future, we will see milk as opaque, fat, and protein. Its intellectual properties are genetically manipulated hormones, starvations, mestices, pre-made organ donations. Children carrying guns pointing them at their own mother is not a pre-existing condition of climate change, climax, or greed. How reliable are we of loving a stranger? Must we be a naked vial, sitting barren in the wind without memory, DNA, or antibiotics? Post-war mothers distinguished their tears and scars by becoming lotus flowers that could be folded into medical helicopters or sexual positions, thus fulfilling the prophecy of cross-pollination. Thank you for your time.
Sally, you're muted.
I was saying, Vi Khi, thank you so much for your poems and for your time today, and we're really grateful. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who came out today. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Amanda. This was really an incredible conversation. And yeah, thank you. So please, tomorrow, join us for a radical poetry reading facilitated by Brandon Shimoda. And thank you for coming out today. You can turn on your microphone and say goodbye as we leave, please.
Thank you so much, Ursula.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was wonderful.
I am so impressed.
Really amazing conversation. Thank you for those beautiful poems.
Excellent program.
Thanks,
that was also awesome.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Amanda and Jason.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Cal. Thanks, Fong, and thanks, Nick.
Yeah,
Charlie, what's happening?
It's Gil, Ursula. Nice to see you again.
All right.
Well,
no,
we like you very much.
Out here, we'll see you, whatever. We'll solicit them if we don't have to pay for their session.
Yeah, thank you, Terry.